New Mexico's public TV stations, KNME, KRWG, and KENW, are proud to present the 2018 3rd Congressional District Candidate Conversations. Recorded in the KNME studios in Albuquerque and featuring all three of the major party candidates, Democrat Ben Ray Lujan, Libertarian Christopher Manning, and Republican Gerald Steve McFall. Welcome to this Election 2018 special. I'm Gene Grant of New Mexico PBS. We're proud to partner once again with not only the other two New Mexico PBS stations, KENW and KRWG, but also NPR radio stations KUNM and KANW. Our goal is simple: to help inform you, the voters, before you cast your ballot in this year's midterm elections. And today we sit down with the three candidates for the 3rd Congressional District. Ben Ray Lujan is the incumbent and has served in Washington since replacing Tom Udall back in 2008. His challengers this year are Republican Gerald Steve McFall and Libertarian Chris Manning. I sat down recently with all three to talk about their goals and priorities, and we'll start first in random order with the Libertarian candidate, Chris Manning. Chris Manning, thanks for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. My first question, as in the unique perspective you have as a major third-party candidate, what does that bring to the office or to the race, in your opinion?
Well, I think in today's political environment, it provides a middle ground for the anger and the hostility we've seen with the two major parties. And what's great about being with the Libertarian Party is we've got something that people on the right will really appreciate and people on the left politically will really appreciate. And so I really believe that we are that center party that most Americans are looking for.
Let's talk about the district. Just get right there. The 3rd Congressional District is big, it's complicated. We were talking, there's all kinds of economic ups and downs for folks. But it is one of the richest counties in the country when you really think about it, in Los Alamos specifically. But it also has some of the poorest communities in the state. How will you try to balance this in the Congress? What can you do as a congressperson to balance that, that have and have not that we seem to find in that district?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of trying to make sure that you keep every dollar that you earn. So obviously I'm very much a fiscal conservative. I want you to be able to keep 90+% of your income. And I think that's going to help anyone regardless of what their total income is. If you are able to take home an extra 10-12%, that's huge for many people, especially those on the lower income spectrum. And I think the biggest issue we have with that is government spends too much money, especially at the federal level. When you're running nearly $1 trillion deficit, that's, to me, is unacceptable, because every dollar that the government spends is a dollar they took from your pocket or my pocket. It isn't something that they just, picked that off on the money tree. Right.
Can we meet our obligations with a lower tax scheme, as libertarian folks like yourself like to talk about? Can we do both?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look across all of the programs, there's definitely room for cuts. For example, if we were to end our wars in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq, that's $50 billion a year you can cut from the Department of Defense without harming national, defense. If you look, for example, Medicare has about a 10% fraud rate. That's, tens of billions of dollars every year that's going fraud, waste, and abuse. So with every program, you have room. You can make 3% to 10% cuts and still provide all the services that people need.
On that note, interesting you mentioned that. Let's talk about healthcare a little bit. About half New Mexicans, as you know, are on some kind of federal program, Medicare, Medicaid. Would you support, well, I actually have two questions. Would you support maintaining or even increasing funding for health issues like this for New Mexicans, these programs?
Well, actually, I have a radically different idea of what I think we should do with healthcare. I would think we should look more to the Switzerland model, and I would like to see our health insurance model be shifted to an individual market rather than an employer-based market. And when it comes to our government-funded, right now, if you hit 65 years old, you turn 65 years old, you're eligible for Medicare. You have a certain income level, you're eligible for Medicaid, as many New Mexicans are. Unfortunately, that's a large percentage of the population then that's on government, health insurance. But what I would rather see is us go to more of a condition-based for our government healthcare system. So an example, brain cancer is an extremely expensive condition to treat, and life expectancies aren't great. But someone who has brain cancer is going to fall into what's called a super user. So they're the 5% of the sickest individuals who consume about 50% of all healthcare spending. Those are the individuals I would like to see transition optionally to a government-run health insurance program. So you get the guaranteed coverage, you get your guaranteed treatment, but then it also takes away that adverse selection from the individual insurance market, making it much more affordable for you and me to make those insurance purchases ourselves.
I think I know the answer to this given what you just said there, but do you support the proposal to expand enrollment options in the Medicaid program? Because our legislature is going to be talking about this next session. So to be clear, if you get into Congress, that is not something you would support at this point.
No, it isn't. And it's not because I don't want people to have coverage. Like I said, it's just I have a different method of what I think would be a better way to run health insurance in this country and get health care. Like I said, you've got near universal coverage in Switzerland. It's like 99.5. Sure. But every single individual chooses their own health insurance company. In Switzerland, with a population less than Texas, has 90 different companies competing for your dollars. In the U.S., we have 5 companies that have about 60% of all private insurance.
That's right. How can the Congress be effective in breaking up that sort of
it's a cartel
monopoly you're talking about? So, yeah.
But it's government-protected cartels.
Gotcha.
You know, there have been many legislative acts that help to make sure that these insurance companies are able to basically strangle any competition and prevent new players from coming onto the market. So you have to attack that, and basically an antitrust type situation. But even just in small areas, a company like, for example, a hospital provider, they can take over an entire geographic region.
Right.
And once they do that, well, then they have a de facto monopoly.
Gotcha.
Because you're not going to go for emergency medical care 10 miles away.
That's right.
It's not like shopping on Amazon. So you have to look at those regional monopolies too.
Question still on health. Opiate addiction, of course, in the 3rd Congressional District has been well documented as a problem, well as other parts of the country, but specifically to your district. What would you do as a member of Congress to help beat back that scourge in that district?
Well, this is the one where I got to pull out my libertarian card and look towards the legalization of marijuana and cannabis. There was actually a study done by the National Institute of Health that showed that in areas where cannabis was legalized, you saw reductions in opioid exposure or deaths, you saw a reduction in opioid spending, you saw a reduction in traffic fatalities, you know, and the problem is right now, healthcare providers don't have that as an option to provide, say, CBD or THC as an alternative to opioids. And you know the thing that I like about this idea is cannabis has never shown to kill anyone. Nobody's overdosed on cannabis, whereas that can't be said for opioids, which kill 60,000 people last year.
Right. Immigration. Do you support the current restrictions on who can come into our country on immigrants and refugees? Are you in line with what this current administration is doing?
No, I think they reduced the number to about 30,000 asylees and refugees this year, which is the lowest number, I think, since they've been keeping track.
That's right. Yeah.
And I don't support that. But I'm also in favor of something that isn't very popular, and I'm actually in favor of increasing legalized immigration. Right now, I think last year you had 400,000 people who were apprehended at the border crossing illegally. So clearly there's this great demand. But also if you look fiscally, the United States needs to increase our legal immigration just to keep our social welfare programs solvent. One of the biggest issues we have is our declining birth rate. And one way to help alleviate that is by increasing legal immigration. Like I said, I think most people are perfectly okay with people coming into this country. They just prefer that they do it a legal way.
Right.
So I think if Congress actually did its job and worked to really actually push a comprehensive immigration reform that increased legal immigration, but then also transitioned us from a family reunification more to a skills-based and some meritocracy in our system, I think everyone gets a win-win there. You get
Can all
both
that be
sides
done?
want.
You know, a merit-based system as well as increasing, as well. You know, you're asking for a lot there. Can that actually be done?
I mean, that was put forward back in the mid-90s by a Congresswoman out of Texas. Her name eludes me right now. But during the Clinton administration, she put this forward. Hers was limited to 500,000 people, but you know, obviously that was 20 plus years ago.
Right.
I think it can, but it has to be done with somebody who's actually wanted to get something done rather than just kick the can down the road so that way they have an issue to campaign on next election. I think that's the biggest issue. No one wants to give the other party the win.
Right. A question begs, we'll move on after this, but a question begs, that we are a border state, so what you're proposing would have a direct impact in the 3rd Congressional District, certainly. Is that tell me what that would mean for the upside of the district if you had more people able to come in. Is that better economic development? Is it better labor? Is it better, what happens for the district?
Well, I think it is. In most cases, immigration has been a net positive. Whether it's been, in the 1800s or today, you see a net benefit. But the problem is we really don't have a whole lot of restrictions or even qualifications to come in. We just say, if you've got family here for the most part, I think that makes up, family reunification is over 80% of all immigration. If we put at least half of our immigration towards a merit-based, I'm okay with keeping a lot of it still family-based, but just increase some of that meritocracy so that way we have a little bit more say in shaping our economic future through the immigration channel. We've
got a bit of a debate going about climate change in our country right now, as you know, but it's a legitimate topic, certainly for someone going to the Congress. I want to get a sense of how you feel about this issue, and then also how it directly impacts the 3rd District. I mean, we're almost ground zero for drought here in the state. It's just really having a hammer blow on our state. What's your sense of what you would do specifically in the Congress to help alleviate this problem? Well,
I think the problem is it's been so politicized and the actual science gets drowned out. Since the satellite era in 1979, the Earth has warmed an average of 0.13 degrees Celsius per decade, or 100 years from now, 1.3 degrees Celsius, which is under the big scary number of 2 degrees Celsius that the Paris Accords had. Part of the reason why we're seeing drought right now is simply because of the Atlantic Ocean is in what's called it's in a warming trend in what's called the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. And right now, part of the reason why the last 10 years we've seen the increasing temperatures in the U.S. is because both the Pacific and the Atlantic are in this warming trend. But those only last for the Pacific 10 to 20 years before it shifts, and the Atlantic 20 to 80 years before it shifts. Once those go into a cooling trend again, well, we're most likely to see an increase in precipitation in the lower 48. So if you look at the long history of the weather in the U.S., you see these patterns, and I think it's just a continuation of that pattern, but unfortunately gets politicized.
Very much so. Los Alamos National Labs, got to talk about this since this is the PennDOT center economically for the district. What would you do to ensure the viability of the labs going forward as a member of Congress?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of research and development, and they do a lot of research for us. Also, I'm a big proponent of nuclear energy because I think it satisfies both parties when you look at it objectively. If you're concerned about greenhouse gas emissions and you want to transition away from fossil fuels, well, nuclear fuel has that ability. There are no greenhouse gas emissions. You have the radiation. But the problem has been that with legislative roadblocks that prevent new nuclear power from coming online, if you look at France, I think it's somewhere like 85 to 90% of all their nuclear fuel is used up or recycled. So there's very little waste now with nuclear reactors, the modern ones. But we haven't built a new reactor since, I think, the 70s.
That's true, too. Staying with Landell for a quick second, there's been issues over the years about the cleanup on sites in the Landell footprint, so to speak, and then also WIP. There's been issues. What would be your plan to ensure Los Alamos is doing its civic duty to take care of the environment around the laboratories?
Absolutely. As somebody I love going out and backpacking, I like camping, and so I'm a big proponent of making sure that we have clean air and clean water. I got an opportunity this year to go to Brazil and go to the Brazilian rainforest and spend a day on the Amazon River. So I'm very much in support of conservation, and really when you drill it down, it's in everyone's best interest, and including Landell's best interest, to make sure the area around them stays clean and for future generations. And I think, instead of demonize people who maybe have a little bit different philosophy on how you get to the clean air, clean water aspects, I think if we really, come with the solution, this is what we both want, how do we get there? And that's really is, I think, the biggest issue is it's just how is it done? Not is it going to be done?
Yeah. Guns and gun violence with students. Simple first question, who should be able to own a gun in our society currently?
Well, I think it's an individual right guaranteed by the Constitution. I'm very much a constitutionalist, and I believe that that was the intent of the Second Amendment. And also, I think it's incumbent upon me to be responsible for my own safety. And unfortunately, firearms are one of the best ways to protect your life and liberty. Saying that, though, you have to be responsible. If you're a gun owner, you absolutely must be a responsible gun owner and ensure that any guns in your house are not accessible to children, and that you teach your children proper gun safety.
How far are you willing to go on new restrictions that are being proposed out there to close loopholes at gun shows, and et cetera? What's your philosophy there about again, this ability to purchase firearms? What's your thought there?
Well, I'm a little bit more libertarian in that, and I don't think you as an adult should actually have much of a restriction. If you turn 18 years old, then I don't think the government should restrict you from being able to purchase a firearm unless you have some disqualifying process where you've gone through your due process rights and you have objectively lost that right. As far as the gun show loophole, that's kind of a misnomer, because anyone, regardless of where they sell, if they're in the business of selling firearms, you have to conduct a background check. Even if you sell at a gun show. It'd be just the way that the only people who don't have to is say, I have my own personal firearm, and I've decided I want to sell it. So I go to this gun show and I sell this one time, one single weapon. Well, then I'm not required to do a background check on the buyer of that. And that's where some of those sales actually happen, where there isn't a background. It's simply a one-time transaction.
Are you comfortable with that? That's a loophole. Are you comfortable with that loophole? Okay.
Well, I think it is, when you actually think of the practicality of how would you institute a universal background check. So how is the FBI going to do this? Are you going to have an open portal where anybody can log on, run a background check on anyone? How are you going to verify that you're running a background check to ensure that's for a weapon sale and not just somebody wanting to look into your background?
Gotcha.
Do you have to do a one-time permission from the FBI, and then you got to think of that increased workload on the FBI then, because now you've got a new basically organization within the FBI you've got to create just to handle permission sets. And that's a massive amount of people considering our population and how many gun sales there are in a year.
It's complicated, certainly.
It
Our
is.
last question, I asked this of everyone because I'm curious. You're a first-time candidate for office. What is it about public service that's attractive to you? What does it mean to you, this idea of public service?
Well, it started obviously when I was younger. When I was in my early 20s, I joined the military. I served for 6 years in the Arizona National Guard and did a tour overseas. So I've always been a big proponent of doing something bigger than just myself. When I got out after 6 years, I had kind of felt like I did my time, I did my duty. But as the years have been going on and you've seen this increased polarization in DC, there's so few people who I think are willing to work down the middle, who are looking to actually compromise and get things done. And I'm one of those people, I don't care what your party affiliation is, whether you have a party or not. My job is, and what my goal is, to actually get things accomplished, because I don't care who gets the win, right? I don't care if a Republican gets a win or a Democrat gets a win. I just simply want to get something done. And I think that's part of the reason what drove me is because I'm not interested in the platitudes.
Chris Manning, thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Just to reiterate for the folks watching at home, in case they tuned in halfway, you are the third-party candidate, so to speak, libertarian candidate, and so you're representing that. Thank you for coming in.
I appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Absolutely. Next up, we hear from Ben Ray Lujan. Before winning the 3rd Congressional District seat in 2008, he served on the Public Regulation Commission, and Representative Lujan is also the chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. We sat down earlier this week to talk about his accomplishments to date and what more he still wants to do in D.C. Congressman Ben Ray Lujan, thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Gene. Absolutely.
First question, kind of an easy one. You've been in Congress for a while now. What would you consider your biggest accomplishment as a congressman right now?
Well, over the last several years, I've been honored to be serving the people of New Mexico, but especially learning from our constituents during my many travels throughout the state. I'm honored that I've traveled tens of thousands of miles. I hold town halls, public forums, Congress on your corners, making myself available to learn from our constituents. Most recently, I had worked on a bipartisan package to address opioid addiction and addiction across America. So while even serving in the minority, I was able to succeed in authoring 10 specific pieces of legislation that ultimately made it into the final package that I believe will make a difference in people's lives. It'll be signed by the president, I believe, very soon. And nonetheless, it shows how you can work together to address these important issues. I've also been working closely with the New Mexico Land Grant and Acequia Association over the last many years in crafting legislation recognizing the importance of acequias and land grants and how we can encourage the federal government to work closely with these traditional cultural communities, many of which I learned about growing up. So those are two specific areas that I'm proud of, that I've worked on, but also our casework. I have one of the largest caseloads in the country when it comes to constituent casework. In New Mexico, about 30% of our casework is for veterans. So working day in and day out to see how we can make a difference in people's lives who have served our country, allowed us to be here today with the freedom of speech and practicing our day-to-day lives, and making sure that they get the benefits that they've earned, that they've fought for, not just for them, but for their families. So always putting people in New Mexico first and making sure that we're always leading with that priority.
Priority, it's a good word there. I was about to ask you the very same thing. What's the one thing you feel the district needs right now that you would make a priority if you went back to the Congress?
Well, there are many areas, I would say, that are very important to the district, but everything that's associated with the economy. Now that means better jobs, better opportunities when it comes to investments in like Los Alamos National Laboratory, the Air Force Research Lab, Sandia, working to spur more tech transfer to help entrepreneurs and small businesses prosper. Finding ways to support existing small businesses, but encouraging others to come to New Mexico. But I would say most importantly, when it comes to education in the state of New Mexico. We need to maximize the federal investments into the state of New Mexico, protect Title I programs, maximize support for students with disabilities coming into our state, but work closely with the next governor of the state of New Mexico and the legislature, business leaders, faith leaders, nonprofit leaders, to strengthen New Mexico's education system. When I visit with CEOs from small businesses across the country, Gene, and I ask them what it's going to take to get you to New Mexico, they say they want a high quality of life, which we have. They want a place where they can still afford a piece of land and a home, which we have in New Mexico. But they ask about the quality of our education for our kids. So there in its own, we can make a substantial investment, change the way that things are happening, and make sure that New Mexico is at the top of those lists, not at the bottom.
Your district, the 3rd Congressional District, has one of the richest counties in the country, Los Alamos County. But it also has some of the poorest counties in our country as well. And that seems to me to be a very tricky thing for economic development. How do you meet the needs of the folks in Los Alamos County and the rest of your constituents in the rest of the 3rd? What's the way that you want to balance that kind of economic development activity?
Well, there's a former senator out of the state of Minnesota, Paul Wellstone, who once said that we all do better when we all do better, and I believe that. And so the same economic policies that we would advocate for hardworking middle-class families, they're going to help everybody. And it's putting the priorities into working families. It's one of the areas where I disagree with the Republican leadership under Republican control of Washington, D.C. right now. You look at the tax scam that they recently passed. Under the auspice of helping middle-class families, they moved a tax package that cost over $2 trillion, and 83% of the benefit went to corporations and the top 1% earners in the country, all while taking manufacturing jobs and equipment outside of the United States. That's not making a difference in people's lives. So by continuing to lean in and see what we can do to help hardworking middle-class families, job training programs, college affordability, understanding not everyone's going to go to college. My dad had an incredible education. He understood the importance of chemicals and elements, heating temperatures. My dad was a welder. He was an iron worker, a union iron worker. We need more programs when it comes to vocational programs for our students, as well as working with unions and other important leaders for these apprenticeship programs as well to build a strong workforce in New Mexico. I'm also an advocate for worker spaces. Maker spaces. So when you look at maker spaces, coupled with incubator spaces and these small communities, you bring the creative side in addition to the business expertise. So you also encourage the development of more small businesses. Agriculture is critically important to New Mexico. It was in Mora back in the 1940s that had the best wheat at the World's Fair. We can do more in New Mexico with added value in agriculture. It's one of the frustrations I have with the current control of Republicans in Washington, D.C. as well. The Farm Bill is stalled, and we need to continue to work to get that Farm Bill adopted with provisions that I fought for to help local acequias be able to access more funds, but also help smaller producers, not just the big producers across America, smaller producers like we have right here in New Mexico, to be able to get added value out of their chili or out of their crops and be able to get their product to market. I think those are a few areas that help us all throughout New Mexico, but help put a a great place for us on the map.
Let me buzz through a couple subjects here real quick with you, make sure we're on par with the other candidates. Healthcare, as you know, about half of New Mexicans are on some kind of federal health care scheme, Medicare or Medicaid. Do you support the idea of expanding these programs for New Mexicans?
One, the Affordable Care Act, it was an important piece of legislation that actually expanded coverage in New Mexico. New Mexico had the highest uninsured rate in America. Right now, we're still at about 10%, so there's work to do. So we need to do more to push back against this Trump administration and against Republicans trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Mitch McConnell just announced this week that Republicans are going to put that back on the agenda in addition to cutting Social Security and Medicare. Now, I've authored a piece of legislation with a colleague out of the U.S. Senate, Senator Schatz, that would establish a state public option to allow people to buy into Medicaid regardless of their incomes. Understanding that we need access to affordable, quality health care no matter where you live or how much money you make. So I want to see support for Medicare, more support for Medicaid, expand access to those important programs for the people of America, and I'll fight against every one of my Republican colleagues who has an intention to repeal the Affordable Care Act and take protections away from people with pre-existing conditions.
Right. Immigration and border issues, let's talk about a little bit too. You know where the administration is right now. There's lots of stuff in the news. We have kids in tents. We've got lots of activity at the border right now. I think I know the answer to this, but do you support what's going on with the border restrictions right now? Or if there's another way to do this, to manage the flow of immigrants coming into our country, what's your solution to that as well?
There's no question Congress must take up comprehensive immigration reform. And the hypocrisy here, Gene, is that if any of these pieces of legislation, the DREAM Act, the USA Act, which would address reversing what President Trump did and going after dreamers and also make investments in border security, or a comprehensive piece like that passed the Senate a few years ago, if any of those bills were brought to the House floor, they would pass, even with Republicans in control of the U.S. House. But the Republican leadership refuses to allow those bills to come to the floor. There's more that must be done. And rather than the conversations associated with abolishing ICE, what's needed is immediate reforms, immediate overhaul of border security and also with ICE, so that we're able to return morality as well as keeping people safe in the United States of America. Comprehensive immigration reform will address so many of these issues, and everyone must admit we have a broken immigration system in the United States.
The environment, big part of our state, and of course in the 3rd District as well. We've been well documented. We're ground zero here for drought. We've been in a difficult situation with our surface water, with our level of river dropping. Your sense of what the Congress can do as a congressperson, what can the Congress do to help this climate change situation, particularly in aspect how it could help folks in the 3rd District?
Well, so this is an important debate taking place, not just in New Mexico, in the United States, but around the world. Climate change is real. Global warming is happening. It's man-made. I'm not a climate scientist, but 99% of climate scientists agree with these findings. There's a big problem when we have colleagues, even this president, who sometimes suggests that climate change is a hoax or that there's nothing that can be done. We can immediately take steps. We can generate more energy from renewable resources, like legislation that I've authored in the Congress, building off of success with my time at the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, to have more energy developed from renewable resources, energy efficiency standards, pushing back against this administration, who walked away from the Paris Climate Accords as well, where we must be working with our allies around the world to make a difference, understanding the devastation that'll be caused, not just with famine, but also with disease and the conflicts that exist for national security purposes. Just look to the reports that have come out of the Department of Defense as well, with their concerns of the negative impacts associated with climate change on the safety of America, as well as the safety of people around the world. We have to tackle this important issue. There are many, many issues. I think that we don't have enough time to go over all of them, Gene. This is something that we must tackle, and I think everyone across the country knows the importance of this. We've got to do this in a bipartisan way.
Let's talk about the labs. You mentioned them earlier in your opening to this, but it's important to kind of concentrate just for a quick second. Protecting the labs, of course, is a congressperson's job, of course, but do you see other issue areas where the labs could be influential, could lead the country in a new direction? Is there a new mission out there? What's your sense of where the labs could be compared to where they are now?
Well, I often describe our national labs, not just in New Mexico, but across the United States, as any time that you see something bad happening in the world, someone from Los Alamos or Sandia is there trying to figure out what's happening. Anytime you see something bad that's occurred that is being solved or being addressed, someone from Los Alamos or Sandia is there that has lent some insight to how we can make things safer or better for people. The expertise that we have at our national labs is critically important. They're national centers of excellence, and we must always look to see how we can expand opportunities, bring in more research, and take full advantage of what the labs can deliver, especially during economic tough times that the country faces. Tech transfer, the importance of the research that takes place, the importance of non-proliferation, which comes out of the expertise from these centers of excellence that will help us move forward in that direction as well. I was very clear, not just to the Secretary of the Department of Energy, but to the NNSA recently, as we were seeing the transition at Los Alamos National Laboratory, that there also had to be an emphasis when it came to employee safety. We also need to make sure that we're cognizant of everyone that's working there. Physicists, scientists, iron workers, fabricators, researchers, admin support staff, they all matter. And we all need to make sure that they're all safe, and that that is going to be an important part.
Are you satisfied with the steps the labs has taken recently about safety? There's been some high-profile issues out there.
There have been some high-profile issues, and that's exactly why I brought this to the attention of the Secretary of Energy as well as to the administrator at the NNSA. More must always be done. This must be a focal point, and there are parameters within the new contract with the Triad organization that has taken over Los Alamos National Laboratories. But we must all keep a watchful eye to ensure that people are going to be kept safe, and that protocols are going to be secured, and that we're going to make sure that safety is a top priority for our labs as well.
We've got about 5 minutes left. I want to get in guns and violence in schools. Unfortunately, it's been a big problem across the country, and of course here in New Mexico and in your district as well, certainly. Yeah, your sense of gun ownership, we have Second Amendment tension versus who should have a gun, who shouldn't have a gun. Where are you right now in gun ownership? Who should have guns, and how do we keep kids safe in schools from guns?
Well, Gene, from Sandy Hook to Parkland to Aztec, this is an important issue that must be addressed. And the number of students that have come forward, especially over the recent years, have changed the conversation around America. Look, this is not about taking away the Second Amendment. That's not what this is about. But there are some common sense steps that can be taken in a bipartisan way to address gun safety and gun violence in America. Overturning the Dickey Amendment, which currently does not allow federal dollars to research gun violence in the country. That's ridiculous. We should be able to research the causes of gun violence in the country. Closing loopholes such as gun show loopholes, requiring mandatory background checks, making sure that felons, people that are guilty of domestic violence aren't able to purchase weapons as well. People that are on the terrorist watch list shouldn't be able to purchase weapons as well. They're restricting magazine size. The conversation currently around assault weapon ban as well. There has to be a conversation here. And look, there is a lot of bipartisan work taking place in this area. I'm confident that people in the Congress, Democrats and Republicans, can come together to get this done, in addition to the commitments that were made after the massacre in Las Vegas, Nevada, to ban bump stocks as well.
You have a high-profile job as head of the DCCC. You're in charge of getting candidates elected all over the country. How do you balance that, the demands of that job, with the demands you have as being a representative for the 3rd Congressional District? How does that work out?
Well, Gene, I have 2 important jobs. My first one and my priority is always representing the people of New Mexico. Again, traveling tens of thousands of miles, holding town halls, Congress on your corners, constituent casework, working on policies and legislation that come directly from those conversations. That's always my priority. My second job, as recently elected by my colleagues, is to win back the majority with Democratic candidates in the U.S. House of Representatives. I believe that's directly aligned with the values and the principles that I uphold as well. Fighting for access to affordable health care, making sure that we're able to protect clean air and clean water, that we're able to bring investments to traditional communities like acequias and land grants here at home. We can get all that done. And so it's just a matter of making sure you're putting in more hours. You work every day, you travel the district, you make sure that you're working with your colleagues and your peers, and you do the job to the very best of your ability. But it was critically important to me, Gene, that when I was honored with being elected to this leadership responsibility in the Congress, that I would not take any attention away from the importance of what I must do to live up to my commitments and obligations for the people of New Mexico. And I'm doing that to the best of my ability every day. Otherwise, my mom wouldn't let me off the hook as well. You know, it's good to have someone like Mom always keeping a close eye on the work you're doing and not letting you take your focus off of what's most important, which is the people that entrusted me to represent them.
Don't go against Mom, that's right. For sure. Last question for you. I'm always curious when I have candidates sit down with us, what does public service mean to you? What beats in your heart about public service?
Look, Jen, I think at the fabric of this, public service is about making a difference in people's lives, putting people first. My father, my late father, Ben Lujan, who served as Speaker of the House in New Mexico, he always reminded me that behind every vote, there's a person. Right. And you have to understand that the positions that you take with the vote that you've been empowered by, how it's going to make a difference or what it's going to do to people back home, and always look at it through that lens. Standing up to injustices, using your voice. I also learned from my mom and dad very early in my life that you use your voice to speak up for those who feel that they don't have a voice. You make sure that they're at the table, that you're speaking up for them as well. In this case, people like my father who got sick on the job because those worker protections weren't in place. Right. Veterans who feel that the VA or others have walked away from them or made it harder for them to get the benefits that they've earned. You got to stand up for them and make sure that you keep drilling down and holding people accountable until you make it right for people as well. That's right. And so that's what I think it's about. Every day that you can stand up and fight, put people first, and make a difference in people's lives. That's what public service is all about.
Congressman Ben Ray Lujan, thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gene. Thanks for having me.
Good luck on the trail.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Lastly, we hear from the Republican candidate Gerald Steve McFall. Mr. McFall is a resident of Angel Fire. He has never held public office before, but ran unopposed in this past June's Republican primary. He is a farmer and has worked in the ski industry as well. We sat down to talk about what it will take for a Republican to win the 3rd Congressional District for the first time since 1999. Steve McFall, welcome to KNME. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Series of questions. I want to start off with this. You say on your website that I noticed that one of your strengths is that you're not a career politician, and you're not. Why do you see that as a strength in the Congress?
Well, career politicians have been there for so long, you know, and even people wanted me, I should run for this office and run for that office. Well, then I become a career politician. And along the way, I think they forget where they came from. They forget the real issues that people have to deal with in everyday life. And the longer they're there, the less they can identify with just your everyday average citizen. You know, that's, I'm going to literally, the founding fathers wanted that. They wanted you to go from your job to do the people's business and then go back. And I literally will walking right straight out of a field into Washington, D.C., and then I'll come back and do my job. Yeah. I have no intention of being a career politician. Don't want to be.
What if the people decide otherwise?
Well, then I'll stay. Okay. If the people decide, then I'll stay.
Okay.
You know, and that's another reason why I'm against term limits, if you want to go to that route. Right. I think a term limit is giving up a little bit of our freedom. And like you just said, if they want somebody to stay, then you should be able to have that freedom to do so. We don't need term limits. All we need is people to get out and vote. That's more important.
Absolutely. Let's get right to the 3rd Congressional District and some issues there. It's a very complicated district. I don't have to tell you. You've got one of the richest counties in our country in Los Alamos County, but you've also got some other counties that are some of the poorest in our country as well, not just our state. How do you balance the demands for economic development that would work out best for everyone in that district? What can you do in the Congress to increase that?
Well, Los Alamos is kind of unique because most of what pays its bills is the defense budget because of the labs there. So it kind of separates that, you know, basically the rest of our district, which is actually the 16th largest district out of the 435, with one of the smallest and poorest populations. I think Los Alamos would be all right as long as the defense budget's left alone, and I think we need to spend whatever we need to spend to say the strongest. We are the #1 power, and we need to stay that way, whatever it costs. But for the rest of our district, poverty is a big thing. That's what got me into this business, because I got knocked all the way to homeless 8 years ago by overbearing government. And I lived through that system, and I know how to fix poverty in this state. that's where we got to start, and that needs to start with education. There are jobs in this state right now that people can get, but we don't have skilled labor to take those jobs. Right. But we have plenty of people that are on services for one another. For every 100 people working, there's 115 on services. So I think that's where we need to start with our district, is working on poverty and getting people jobs and out of the poverty, out below the poverty.
Do you have a specific plan for jobs? You say you have an idea to fix jobs. You can fix jobs here. Do you have any specifics you can
Well, there are jobs available. Yeah. You know, the data plant in Los Lunas for Facebook is a good example. They're having to go to Texas and Arizona to get skilled labor. You know, and this is people that can read a set of plans and put in a door or wire a plug into a wall. When I went through the system, I saw that there was a lot of reasons why people end up in poverty. Yeah, I don't care how you end up. We're good humans. We will help you. That's right. But I found that there's only 2 reasons why they don't get out. There are those that flat don't care. They don't care that they're living off their family and friends. They think they're living off the government, but they don't understand that that's taxpayers' money. That's your family and friends and neighbors. There are those that flat don't care. But there's a lot of people that want out of the system that don't know how to use it to move themselves back into middle class, and there's no one showing them. So in New Mexico, we have an army of social workers, and what do? They help people get help. They're excellent at helping people get help. As I said, there's 100 people working, 115 on services. What we need to do is retool those social workers, because if you're below the poverty level, there's grants and there's schooling available to get you that skill. And no matter how we have to help them, whether it's with education, transportation, daycare, school, whatever, it's to our benefit to help them and move them through the system. Mm-hmm. But we need to take them by the hand and show them, this is how you do this and this and this. There's no program that's actually doing that. And if we change our social work system to do that, move them through it, and there's checks and balances to make sure they are moving through the system, we can move people through the system and back into the middle class. And then, you know, for those that refuse to take those steps, we'll have to cut them off at some point, you know, and we're talking able mind and body people. But, you know, we cannot allow people to stay on the system forever. Mm-hmm. Jesus said the poor will always be amongst you, but it didn't mean for generation after generation and for long, long periods of time. And, you know, and there's other people that get knocked to the bottom for whatever reason, but we can move them through the system. I saw where it was cheated. I saw how people, you know, don't tell quite all the right information, and they're able to just stay on the system indefinitely. And it's quite easy to do. I appreciate your story of you coming through that, and look where you are today, running for, you know, Congress. The American dream's alive and well if you're willing to chase it. Mm-hmm. And I'm living proof. I had to start with $3.16 to my name as a single dad. And, and now I'm a senior in college. I just got married. We just made an offer on the house. I live in an Angel Fire, and I'm running for Congress. So there's no reason to stay there. The opportunity is there if you're willing to chase it and put the work in. Good for you. That's a good story. Healthcare. We mentioned, let me ask you a couple of specific questions here. As you know, nearly half of New Mexicans are on some kind of federal program, Medicare, Medicaid. A couple of questions here. Would you support giving the 3rd District's level of health care coverage, of everything that we know of what's going on in the district? Would you support maintaining or even increasing the level of support coming out of these federal programs for folks in the 3rd District? Well, everybody's on it right now, and I understand that probably pretty well too. I recently was in the hospital for 2 days, and I made choices based on the fact that I don't have insurance. I'm in the middle class again, but I ain't quite high enough to where I can afford insurance. So I made choices and ended up in the hospital, and I believe I was knocked through that to understand the system. Healthcare is important. I made choices based on the fact I didn't have them, and I ended up in hospital. I've never been that sick in my life. That would not be that unusual for some other folks in the 3rd District. No. So again, do you support programs that would help folks that don't have money in their pocket to pay for health care? Yes. But we also need to move them through the system and get them back out of it. But at the same time, healthcare is such a mess because, and this is the federal government's fault for not fixing it or dealing with it. In my opinion, they need to back out of it and let our free market take care of it. Let me ask you this then. The ACA, of course, the Obama plan, so to speak, but the ACA, has been under some scrutiny by the Trump administration, you know, and others. Do you think it needs to happen? What do you think needs to happen next for the ACA? Is it a viable program in your view? Does it need to be scrapped and start over? What's your opinion on that? I think it should be scrapped and start over. Actually, it's going to scrap itself without anybody doing anything. all you got to do is look at the VA and see how government-run healthcare works. It doesn't. And all the ACA did for New Mexico is put a whole bunch more people on Medicaid, which actually is the best insurance in the land. Believe me, I've been there. But that's taxpayers' money. So we can't, that needs to be for the people that need help, that are at the bottom, but we have to move people through that system and get them out of there and get them off of Medicaid. We can't continue paying.
So when they do come through that system and out of Medicaid, they're going to have to pay someone for health care coverage. Is the ACA still a viable? I've asked you, you already said you would scrap it, but what would folks do otherwise? What's your scheme if the ACA is gone for those that
Well,
can't afford
Medicaid
healthcare?
is still there, and you know, going to the emergency rooms, you may end up with a bill, may not, depends on what your level of income is, but Medicaid's still going to be there for those that are below that level of, you know, in the poverty level. You know, for folks like me, that's where we need to work on the healthcare system itself. And I think that needs to, one, to pull some regulations out to where it's the free market that takes care of it. Free enterprise system has worked better than any system in the history of man. So it needs to, you know, with the doctors, the pharmaceuticals, and the insurance companies all working where they can work in the free market. Just like our car insurance commercials, you see everyone has their little thing. And the market will take care of that if we have regulations such that allows it to do so.
Let's do a scenario here. Let's say you are in the Congress. We've got actually something coming up in our next legislative session, the idea to expand Medicaid coverage here. You know, it's an interesting thing. It's a federal program, certainly, and there's like a tie-in, local and federal. Would you be opposed to that if the legislature, in fact, voted for that to happen, that Medicaid expansion here for New Mexicans?
If we can pay for it without raising taxes. Again, we need to help people. I have a $20,000 medical bill because I didn't have insurance. So I'm stuck in that middle. It'd be nice to have that help. And I was checked to see if I qualified for Medicaid, which I'm way above that now. But it's important. I know that because I just lived through it. And but we need to look at more of getting people away from that. If they need help, we need to help them. We're good folks. We're good humans. We will help you. But we can't raise taxes and continue to put the burden on people that are working and working hard to make it, because it's hard enough to make ends meet already. And making it harder to take care of folks, which we will. But we need to reduce that. We need to move folks out of that system so they can take care of themselves. But I'm all for taking care of anybody that's sick and needs help.
Let's talk about that, another subject, but similar. Opiate addiction, certainly across the country we know what's going on, but in the 3rd Congressional District has had its share of struggles too with opiate addictions. Where do you stand on where Congress can be helpful on this issue? What can a congressperson do if you were to represent that district to reduce the opiate addiction problem up there?
First, we need to secure the border. We shouldn't have to go past the drug problem at the border. Most of the heroin and other drugs like meth and stuff like that, and even some of the legal stuff, is coming across the southern border. Last report I said something like 86% is coming across the southern border. So it needs to be secured, whether it's with a wall or electronic devices or patrol, it needs to be secured to stop the drug trade. The rest of the issues with the border can come along later, but we shouldn't have to go past the drug issue to know that we need to secure the border. On the, like heroin and meth, need stricter penalties and punishment for dealers that are dealing this stuff. And as far as the opiates, well, those are all opiates, but like Oxycontin and the stuff that's legal, we need to educate our people, especially those folks at home, because a lot of those are coming from people taking them from their parents or grandparents' prescription, and it's, you know, it's not secured. So we need to educate people and those folks. I think after securing the border and harsher penalties, then education is going to be the next thing. To get people to realize that, you know, this is bad. You can do this one time and die. And especially, you know, like in Espanola Valley, there was 86 deaths from overdose from heroin last year. And that's just one county. So it's pretty bad up there. But that's the route we're going to have to take, I think.
Speaking of the wall and border security, what's your stance on immigration? Do you support the angle that this current administration is taking at the border? Do you, with lessening?
I think we need to build a wall. We can't build a 2,000-mile wall because there's physically places that it won't work and isn't needed, and that'll take electronic devices and air surveillance and foot patrols. But every place there is a wall, like San Diego, it worked, and there's some places we need to build it and secure it. However else we need to, whether it's electronic devices or patrol, but it needs to be secured. As far as immigration, I'm all for immigration, but I do believe we need to reduce the numbers that we've allowed to come in. We're talking legal immigration, because our economy can't assimilate as many people as we're allowing in, and that just hurts us. Illegal immigration, we got to stop, because that messes with a lot of things. It costs taxpayers money. It keeps wages down.
Do you have a plan? I want to make sure I get some good stuff in before our time runs out. Do you support DACA and what it does for kids that were brought here under no fault of their own, but were brought over undocumented? What's your plan to deal with DACA kids?
I think we should go with what President Trump had proposed and actually allow their families. I mean, we can't, we haven't dealt with it. And just because we haven't dealt with it doesn't mean, all right, we're going to deal with it now and throw you out of here. You know, I know everybody, it's a very emotional thing, splitting up families, but I know some of these kids that have lived here since they were a month old, and it would be like throwing me back to Mexico. You know, I've never lived there, neither have they. But, you know, we have to understand they are here legal. They can be deported by our law. But the last president went outside the Constitution and played politics with their lives by offering them something that he went outside the Constitution to do. And we can't play politics with people's lives. So he offered them a chance. We can't just yank it out from under them. So yeah, every person that originally signed up for DACA should have, they got to get the back of the line by those that did come here legally and waited their turn. But we have to allow them, because we didn't take care of it before it got to be such a mess.
Gotcha. Just a couple minutes left. I got to get in Los Alamos Labs, certainly right smack in the middle of the district. This is probably the most impactful place that a congressperson can be, you know, get the most impact. Just use that word again. What's your plan for Los Alamos? Would you support supporting them and just ensuring their viability in the future for the district? What's your thought about if you were the congressperson of that area?
Well, not just Los Alamos, but Sandia Labs, and we have 3 bases in this state, and all of the funding pretty much comes from the defense budget. And like I said, we are the #1 power. We need to stay there, no matter what it costs. You know, everybody gets mad because that is half our budget.
Support more funding for Los Alamos at this point?
If it's necessary, yes. For whatever work we do, yes, to keep, so we stay #1, period. Whatever it takes to stay #1 on top, that's what we have to do. And unfortunately, that costs money and takes a lot of money, but we have to stay there.
Do they need to do better on the cleaning up of the area around Los Alamos, around the labs? And as a congressperson, how would you be impactful in that regard, the environmental side?
We need to do better in cleaning up after everything, not just Los Alamos, everyday average humans. When you know, I was driving down today and you could see trash along the concrete walls along the interstate. And not just with Los Alamos Labs and hazardous waste or our nuclear waste disposal plant down here. We've got to make sure that we protect our environment, but at the same time not over-regulate to where it costs so much money or hurts businesses to meet those regulations. But we have to keep our environment safe. That's our well-being. If our environment's not going to work, it affects our health.
Good point there. Last question, and I always like to ask this of all the candidates. What does public service mean to you? Why are you in this race?
Well, I'm in this race because I believe God put this path in front of me. It was never my dream to be in politics. And I told you about getting knocked all the way to homeless. I believe that's how he got my attention, by knocking me to the bottom so I could live through some things and see what American citizens are having to deal with and why they're dealing with it.
You feel like you have more empathy for folks that are in a tough situation because you've come through that as well?
Most definitely, and I understand the decisions. You know, we make too many decisions in this country we shouldn't have to. Should I buy gas for my car so I can get to work, or groceries so I have lunch while I'm at work? You know, if I go to a movie, it costs me my gas money for the week. A lot of events that folks wanted me to go to as a candidate, I couldn't go to because that's my electric bill and my water bill. there's decisions that we shouldn't have to make, shouldn't have to decide whether you go to the doctor because you don't have insurance. Far too many questions we have to ask ourselves, how do we deal with this? And because of what I went through, that's why I think I understand and can do a better job for the people, because I am one of them. I'm still making those decisions. And most of our district is in that boat. That's where I'm coming from in this whole deal. The rest of it I've studied. When I went back to school was to study everything I wanted to know more about for this job. But public service is helping people without asking for anything back. And that's where I'm at. You know, I got a lot out of this country. I skied and fished and played golf for a living for 25 years. So I got to do a lot that a lot of people don't get to.
A lot of New Mexico stuff in there too.
Yes, sir. And
Steve McFall, thank you very much for coming in. We really appreciate it. Good luck on the trail.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely, our pleasure. We appreciate you tuning in to hear from all three of the 3rd Congressional District candidates and hope it helps you make an informed choice at the polls this year. If you missed our conversations with the candidates in the gubernatorial and Senate races or our 1st Congressional District Candidate Forum, just head to our website at newmexicopbs.org. Lastly, a reminder that full countywide early voting begins October 20th. Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the polls.